Welcome to the Liberal Conservative Podcast. Today we're going to explore the deadly force incident involving Ferguson police officer Darren Wilson and Michael Brown. So before we get started on that, I want to talk about some crazy things that our leaders are doing in this country in the last few weeks since our last episode. So let's start in Oregon. So in Oregon, high school seniors will no longer have to demonstrate their knowledge in writing and math to be able to graduate. The legislatures are saying these requirements are unnecessary and disproportionately harm students of color. So while people have complained about our education system falling behind other countries, Oregon is making a high school diploma a participation trophy. To me, this is just absolutely unbelievable. Writing, I'm an English teacher, and I've told you before, writing is something that you will do every single day. I tell my kids, I was like, if you're not in science or some type of math related job, or you're not a scientist like I just said, or you probably will not use math every day, but one subject that you will use every single day for the rest of your life is English, whether you speak it, whether you write it. And it is outlandish to me that you get rid of this requirement. You do not have to do this. You will not have to demonstrate your proficiency in this in order to graduate high school. And they're saying that it hurts people, students of color. What you're really doing is putting them further and further behind. So this is an outlandish law, and it's very unfortunate. And I hate Oregon is probably going to feel this for many, many years if indeed they go ahead and put this in the law. It appears, by what I read, it looks like it's in the law, but you got to think that it's not going to last very long. So now let's jump back to Washington, D.C. Last week, New York Democratic Representative Jamal Brown accepted a plea deal in Washington, D.C. for pulling a fire alarm in a House office building. Now, when this first happened, Bowman said that he pulled the fire alarm accidentally. However, the footage was released this week, and it looks like he stole a fire alarm sign from a door, is what it looked like to me. I see him take it off, and I never see him put it down. And then he walks over and pulls the fire alarm purposely. And I'm sure we've all seen the fire alarms. I think everyone knew when he pulled it that he did so on purpose. It's impossible to accidentally pull the fire alarm. So he made himself look absolutely stupid with his lame excuse. And I feel like he should be booted out of the house. I mean, to me, that is just outlandish. He did it to try to pause a vote or postpone a vote. And I can't remember right off the top of my head what the vote was on. So also in Washington, we talked a little bit about it on the Betty Shelby podcast 2 weeks ago. Florida Republican Matt Gaetz filed a motion to remove McCarthy as Speaker of the House. Gaetz and his Democratic counterpart Jamal Brown, in my opinion, are just an example of the extreme politics that's kind of taken over our government. So Gaetz filed this motion. They ousted McCarthy. After 3 weeks of arguing, the Republicans finally elected Representative Mike Johnson as the new Speaker of the House. They skipped over several moderate Republicans, including Jim Jordan. There were so many, I forget now. But the radical Republicans refused to support any moderate candidate, and they put the House of Representatives at a standstill. So the thin majority of the Republicans hold in the House made it necessary to have their support of the far-right Republicans in order to get a new speaker. And it appears that Representative Johnson is a very radical Republican. In my opinion, the Republicans are causing great harm to their presidential election hopes because of all this infighting. If I was a Democrat, I would pounce on this every chance I get during any debates. I don't care what it is. I would jump on it anytime they want to say that Republicans want to say how good they're doing. They're like, you can't even elect a Speaker of the House. So, when I say that the Republicans are kind of causing great harm to the presidential hopes, here's why I think that. So to me, there are many moderate Republicans on the Republican side in the presidential race right now, and there's really none on the Democratic side. On the Republican side, you've got Tim Scott, who I think is he's a representative from Georgia. You've got Mike Pence, who actually just this weekend suspended his campaign. There's several Nikki Haley, who I think is actually amazing. Moderate Republicans who, like Mike Pence, he was the vice president. You see, him and Donald Trump are completely at odds. Nikki Haley was served as ambassador to the United Nations, and she during the Trump administration, and people are going to try to link her to Donald Trump and try to hammer her on that. And to me, she's about as moderate as they come. If you look at when she was a governor of South Carolina. On the Democratic side, the only person I could see running besides Biden, well, let's start with Biden. So Biden has become really nothing but a puppet. I saw yesterday he was carrying a cue card around with reporters' pictures on it, and it appeared from when you zoom in that he had their picture and he could see what questions they were going to ask. The only other Democrat that I see kind of positioning himself to run is Gavin Newsom, who is the governor out of California. In his state, he's got rampant crime. The state government is in a shambles. Companies and citizens are moving out. His woke ideals are just not working. And I've talked to you during the climate change. While I understand, they'd passed a bunch of laws that were not to go out and clear out dead brush and keep everything natural, but it's also causing all these forest fires. So Gavin Newsom, to me, is another example of radical Democrat. And while you have Joe Biden, who's obviously, he's become a puppet. And then on the other side, you have Donald Trump, who's about as radical to the right as you can get. So I don't know what's going to happen. To me, no matter what side of the aisle you are on, the radical left and the radical right are causing major damage to our standing in the world. It's unfortunate. Hopefully we can get righted. I don't care if you are, I've told you before, I voted Democrat and I voted Republican. I don't care what party you are. I care that you're in the middle and you care about middle America. And it appears that our government is moving away from that. They are no longer representing the majority in the middle. Okay, let's get into the deadly force encounter between Ferguson, Missouri police officer Darren Wilson and Michael Brown. In the last episode, which was Betty Shelby and the Tulsa police officer, or Betty Shelby, the Tulsa police officer, I told you that in most incidents involving a use of force by the police, the use of force would not have occurred had the person of interest just complied. So in almost all cases of the use of deadly force, had the person complied, they would probably still be alive. And this is not excused. I've said many times, this is not excused, the excessive use of force. However, all parties involved have a part to play in these incidents. And in this case, this is definitely the case in this incident. I told you before, I'll tell you all during this series, it is not a police officer's job to risk his or her life so you can safely resist arrest. And so on August 9th, 2014, Michael Brown and an accomplice, they had robbed a local convenience store in Ferguson, Missouri. There's surveillance video of the robbery. Michael Brown appeared to be very aggressive during the robbery. The store clerk was not injured, but Michael Brown just appeared to be if you watch the video, you will see what I'm talking about. He's just very aggressive. So the accounts that Officer Wilson and that the evidence show, to me, show an aggressive Michael Brown that initiated an attack on Officer Darren Wilson. So let's move back. Around noon, just after the robbery, Officer Darren Wilson saw Brown and his accomplice walking in the middle of the street on Canfield Drive in Ferguson, Missouri. Wilson initially just pulled up and asked the two men to get out of the street. Brown became aggressive. When he turned to Wilson is when Wilson noticed that Brown's shirt matched the description of the robbery suspect. Brown was also holding the box of cigarillos that had been taken from during the convenience store robbery. So, and I told you, you will find, I'm going to get off the events right now. You will find this case is an example of the lengths that some citizens will go to try to make the police out to be in the wrong. In this case, a large group of people, I don't know what their races were. It just talks about witnesses and their race is irrelevant. So in this case, a large group of people claimed to witness the incident and claimed that Brown did not assault Wilson at all. Even his accomplice, who was standing in the middle of the street with Brown, said that Brown never assaulted Wilson, did not go through the police car window, to open window to attack Wilson, which the evidence just showed. I mean, The evidence is very conclusive in this case. Brown assaulted Wilson while he was still in his police car. There's a mountain of evidence to prove beyond reasonable doubt that the assault on Officer Wilson did occur. And the witnesses who claim to be witnesses and the person who was with him during the robbery denied it. And according to the autopsy of Michael Brown, including the autopsy done by the family's attorneys, there was a significant struggle inside the car. So that means had Michael Brown just got out of the street, just did what the officer said, Officer Wilson probably would have never noticed that his shirt matched the description of the a person that just did the robbery. So Brown comes over, goes through the window, and is assaulting Officer Wilson. Officer Wilson fired at least one round as Brown assaulted him through the driver's side window. The Brown family attorney made a claim that there was no powder burns or stripling. Stripling is like a close range shot on a person, and it's like waves. If you think about a rock flying into water. Their attorney claimed that there was no powder burns or stripling on Michael Brown, so the close range assault could not have occurred. However, in the autopsy, the medical examiner noted a microscopic exam that showed foreign matters in Brown's body consistent with a gunshot at a range of about 1 inch or less. According to the autopsy, Brown was shot 6 times, including one in the thumb, which was inside the car. Physical evidence such as blood spatter was present inside the scout car, proving that the assault did occur. According to the report, the fatal shot was to Brown's forehead. And this is an interesting point to me because the Brown attorney, Ben Crump, who you will recognize as a civil rights attorney, claimed that Michael was shot on the top of his head. And Crump claimed that the only way this could occur is if Officer Wilson laid on the ground and executed Brown as he was down on the ground. And that statement alone, in my opinion, takes away any credibility Ben Crump had. If you've heard Ben Crump speak, he has a history of these outlandish statements. And so to me, anytime he talks, just turn it off. So in addition, to Ben Crump's statements, the Black Lives Matter argument in this case was that at the time he was killed, Brown was running away from Wilson with his hands up saying, "Don't shoot." However, the forensic evidence, and actually the physical evidence for that matter, proved that Brown was facing Wilson and actually coming at Wilson when he was shot and killed. The media and the Obama administration made a big deal out of Michael Brown being an unarmed black man. To me, the fact that they claim the color of Brown's skin was a factor in his being killed is preposterous. And I just said it 5 minutes ago. If Brown had simply complied when Officer Wilson asked him to get out of the street, nothing would have occurred. Nothing would have occurred. Later on, Wilson probably would have saw the surveillance video and said, "Oh, that was the guy I was in the street," but he wouldn't know who he was. He could say, "I saw him. He was here at this time." So the media also claimed that Brown was unarmed and running away, and Wilson chased him down, shooting him as he ran with his hands up. Also an outlandish claim. Based on the totality of the evidence, Brown was the aggressor in the encounter from the time of the robbery until the time he was shot and killed. An unarmed person can still kill or injure an officer or a citizen for that matter. So in my case, in this case, Brown was an assailant. He was attacking. He attacked Officer Wilson without provocation. He committed a crime by attacking Officer Wilson. Officer Wilson had a duty to pursue Brown, especially since he had fired at Brown. And in addition to this, it was reported that Brown was attempting to grab Wilson's gun while they struggled inside the car. And I will tell you, studies show that almost always when a perpetrator attacks an officer's gun, he will inevitably attack that gun again. So the fact that Brown was unarmed has no relevance. And in fact, you can also make an argument that he was attempting to arm himself by attacking Wilson's gun. Some crazy and irresponsible things happened shortly after the Michael Brown shooting that I believe led to a rise in ambush killings of police officers across the United States. First we had Eric Holder. He went to Ferguson a few days after the shooting. Eric Holder was Obama's attorney general. I can tell you, I doubt Eric Holder ever went to a town where a police officer was gunned down in his life. Yet before all the evidence was presented or known, Eric Holder goes to Ferguson, Missouri, and makes Michael Brown a martyr. In addition to this, now remember this happened, let me go back, August in 2014. In November of 2014, before the grand jury declined to charge Wilson, which was on November 24th, the family of Michael Brown testified at the United Nations. So we had a person who had just committed a robbery, who attacked a police officer, and he was being made a martyr by the United Nations. At the United Nations, Brown's family claimed that Officer Wilson was racially profiling Michael Brown and called for Officer Wilson's immediate arrest. And in reality, as I said before, Brown was the aggressor. Wilson has a right to defend himself from physical attack, which Brown initiated. The officer didn't escalate. The officer did not attack Wilson, or I'm sorry, the officer did not attack Brown. He was inside his car. Furthermore, much has been made about Brown. They said he was only stealing a box of cigars. It doesn't matter. Brown robbed a convenience store and assaulted the clerk. He committed a felony regardless of what he stole. And as you probably know, I believe the grand jury was right. In this case, I don't know how they could find any other way. There was a mountain of evidence proving that Michael Brown was the aggressor, and he physically attacked a police officer simply for asking him to get him out of the street. So, this is a case, this is, in my opinion, a prime example of the media and politicians ignoring evidence to shape an agenda. It's clickbait. It is ratings. They purposely ignored evidence, created an agenda, and created hate and discontent. And in my opinion, probably had led to a lot of officers getting killed. And I just told you the color of Brown's skin had nothing to do with him getting killed. He was killed because of his own actions. In the Betty Shelby case, I told you that the officer acted inappropriately. In this case, Michael Brown, he attacked a police officer. And I'm not saying he deserved to die, but his actions led directly to his death. Michael Brown got killed by the police officer solely because he attacked the officer, and no one deserves to die, especially a young person. And in this case, it's very unfortunate, but Michael Brown dictated how that encounter went 100%. And as I told you before, it is amazing that people have the people of Ferguson, the witnesses, and said the guy that was standing right next to Michael Brown when they were in the street, they created this false narrative that they knew was wrong. They knew it was a lie, yet they created it and created all this problems, And I will tell you, that's where the radical left and the radical right, for that matter, they lose the middle America, is when you start demonstrating in the streets, burning down buildings. You lose the middle. In Ferguson, if they would just let it play out, just because a person gets killed by the police does not make them a martyr, and does not mean that you can go burn down buildings. It just is not the case. Michael Brown, it's very unfortunate he's lost his life, but I think, probably what contributed to the way he reacted to the officer, in my opinion, is probably the media and the politicians of the time, of our time right now. They create this false narrative. I remember when Biden first took office, there was a use of force incident, I forget. And, Biden has to qualify a statement about police officers. He says the vast majority of police officers are doing the right thing. Well, that is very true. And I have a teacher that I teach with. He's a black guy. He is an amazing guy. But when we had been discussing the George Floyd when that happened, and he's like, I just wonder how much that goes on. And I was like, that doesn't go on, sir. I was like, it doesn't. I was like, those things are few and far between. Especially now we've got body cameras. I am a big fan of body cameras. A lot of police officers were against them when they first got there, and now people love them as police officer. And I'll tell you why, because it stopped any outlandish complaints that happen. People will call in and say, this officer attacked me, pulled me out of the car, pushed me around. Well, then you go look at the video and it didn't happen. So, in this day and age, the media and politicians want you to think that there is a rampant, excessive use of force by many police officers, and there's just not. It does happen. It happened, 6 months ago in Memphis. It does happen. Officers make mistakes, but in this case, as I said, the grand jury, in my opinion, was right, and they did the right thing by not charging Officer Wilson. And it's very unfortunate what has happened to Officer Wilson. He's probably, I don't know where he is now. Last I'd heard, he was in Texas, and he's staying for life for acting appropriately. So, hey, thank you again for listening to the Liberal Conservative Podcast. I appreciate you taking your time out. It's 20 minutes, and it probably seems like an eternity sometimes. I really do appreciate it. I told you, follow us on Facebook. It's Liberal Conservative Podcast. I have started turning off comments on a lot of my posts. Well, I don't make a lot of posts, but I told you before that the radical left and right are just livid when they write comments. They're just abusive. But one thing I will say is at least they're listening, because they make comments on what I say. So at least they're listening. Maybe we can move some of the radical people in our country more towards the middle and act civilly towards each other. So once again, hey, thank you guys. I appreciate you so much. I'm up to 54 listeners. It's crazy. I'm excited. So obviously that's not much, but I hope you'll come back and listen. We're going to get into the George Floyd incident in 2 weeks. And this is obviously a very touchy subject with people, but I'll break it down. We'll break down the video and we'll talk about the court case. So once again, thanks for listening, and please come back and listen to the Liberal Conservative Podcast. I really appreciate you guys. Thank you.